Hi, Tanya.
Hi.
Um, I cannot really tell you how in a way not it's not happy, but I'm really happy to talk to you today because you're one of the very rare person that has actually been in Gaza over the last 18 months. You've been twice, and correct me if I'm wrong. You were there, and again, correct me if I'm wrong. I think in March 2024, and you went back again. Yeah, I mean, you just came back about 10 days ago, so you spent another month in Gaza very recently, and and I wanted to talk to you because, like, we have seen a lot of horrors on our phones and on our TVs and on our computers, but we most of us, the vast majority of us, were not there. I mean, first, I just wanted to ask you actually, how are you, Tanya?
Frank, you and I had a kind of casual conversation about this earlier, but I'm always better when I'm in Gaza or when I've recently connected with people from Gaza. Um, so I think I'm definitely worse than I was when I was inside Gaza. It's always really difficult to watch these things from the outside. You feel a sense of kind of sometimes helplessness, which I'd like to address because I don't think we're helpless. But that feeling is normal, I think, when you see things on your screen that are so horrific. And the natural reaction, if you have any humanity left in you, is to want to be part in some way of making it stop. Um, so yeah, I think I'm definitely worse than I was when I was inside Gaza. And then particularly today, like you, I expect, I watched the video of the paramedics, the video that was retrieved from the paramedic's phone before he was killed. Um, and it's really hard as a healthcare worker and also as a human to see healthcare workers targeted with such monstrosity and impunity. And I knew it was happening because I mean I work with an organization called Healthcare Workers Watch. We focus on attacks on healthcare. We know they've been happening. We know there've been, well over 100 ambulances that have been attacked so far. Even at the hospital where I was based, this last time I was in Gaza, there was like a graveyard of ambulances in front of the hospital. So a whole bunch of ambulances that were crushed almost beyond recognition by Israeli military violence. And so we knew it was happening, but I think it's different when you hear the sounds, you hear or see it unfold. It hits different. And unfortunately, as you know, international journalists are not let in. Palestinian journalists are often discredited or worse, murdered for trying to reveal to the world what's happening internally. So we don't often, on Western media at least, get to see footage of these things happening in real time. You hear about them, you hear the statistics, but you don't actually see the crimes themselves being committed. For example, summary executions of the paramedics. We knew there were summary executions happening all the time. We know, for example, the paramedics that disappeared, that went looking for Hind Rajab, ultimately were found dead. We just don't have footage of that happening in real time. But I think that particular video made me feel very sick, very honestly ashamed. And I tried to think about why I felt so ashamed. I think I felt ashamed because in the moment when I watched the video, I was, I'm in another country right now, training a group of doctors and nurses on acute pediatric care. And it makes me feel guilty that this isn't my absolute priority every second of every day, because I think it should be.
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. And I think what's and we spoke about this just before as well. We have experienced you like for real in a way, because you were in Gaza, and most of us on our screens, we have seen what we thought, I mean, first, things that no one should ever see in a normal world, but also we have seen, like you talked about Hind Rajab. This was more than a year ago now. When Hind Rajab happened, the story about Hind, the way she was killed, the way the emergency workers going to pick her up were killed, we thought we had reached the worst of the worst. But then the 15 ambulance, like the 15 sort of humanitarian workers are being killed. Reports actually say one by one. Then they're being buried with their ambulances, and we seeing it live on our screens. And we think this is the gravest horror and crime you can ever witness. So it's crushing, but also we expect the world, including our leaders, and to say enough, this is not possible. And it's not happening. And this is like what's even more crushing, isn't it?
Yeah, you always assume that is the red line that's gonna turn things around, that's gonna wake people up, that's gonna mean suddenly there's a shift in the tide. And you've seen that. I mean, we've seen it over and over again with other atrocities. You know, the little boy that had drowned during immigration. Do you remember? There's just little things like that, you know, images that stick in your head, images that change the tide for the Vietnam War, that change the tide for different wars of the past. There doesn't seem to be an image, an atrocity, a red line crossed in the case of this genocide that is enough to humanize the Palestinians, that is enough for Western society to remove its permission to exterminate the Palestinian people, because at the moment, unfortunately, that's exactly what we're seeing. We're contending with Western society giving permission for this to take place. Even in the way media reports it, with every headline, there's almost there's almost always a choice of words or an ending sentence that manufactures consent for atrocities that are unjustifiable. And, you know, Frank, I've been speaking to the media now for a year and a half. And when I first started, I was very descriptive. I was doing official communications for Doctors Without Borders. I was very descriptive in what people were seeing on the ground, in the atrocities that were unfolding, in the humanitarian situation or crisis. And I use the language that I'm used to using as in my profession. You know, I've been doing this for a long time. And normally that's enough. You know, you let the world, you provide your témoignage, you're bearing witness, and it's enough to garner support to relieve that suffering. And I'm starting to feel that maybe my approach on this is all wrong, that maybe I need to change from what I'm used to doing, and we all need to change from what we're used to doing and do things differently, because we're battling a reality where Western civilization is willingly and knowingly. We all knew about Hind Rajab. We had the audio recording. We had the different newspapers describing exactly what happened. We all know what's happening with the paramedics. We know. Nobody can say that they don't know. So we're battling with this reality where Western societies are knowingly authorizing this. And so what's the point of people like me coming out and saying, look, it's genocide. Look, most of the people we were resuscitating were children. Look, they attacked the hospital while I was in it. They bombed the floor right above me. While I was inside the hospital, I was there. I saw it. I know there was no militant activity in the hospital. I know that there were patients there. I know they killed patients. What's the point in me saying all of these things when we know it already? It's not changing the reality on the ground. I mean, I spoke at the UN in November, and the point that I repeated over and over again was that, you know, there are no words left to convey what is happening on the ground. We used, you know, you reach a point where virtually every humanitarian organization, or sorry, every human rights organization that has and humanitarian organization, actually, because several did the same investigation, who've asked the question about genocide, have come up with the same conclusion. You know, you reach a point where there's almost no point in continuing to just expose atrocities on its own without without doing something more radical. And Frank, the word radical gets a bad reputation, but if you look up the word radical, it shouldn't have a bad reputation. What we need right now is something radical.
Yeah, radical is addressing the root of the problem, and that's what we need to do, you know. And yeah,
it is, and any other way of addressing it just generates noise. And I worry sometimes that I'm inadvertently doing that I'm being invited onto the media to talk about the humanitarian situation, and it just generates noise, and noise with no consequence and no relief for the Palestinian people. I mean, you remember Muhammad Durra, Frank?
yeah, I do.
There's so many names that we can talk about. You can talk about so many names over the course of my lifetime of Palestinian history. So many names that should have been that red line, that should have been that turning point, that should change the narrative, that should make us question what we're fed about this by Western media, by politicians in so many of the countries that are complicit in this.
Yeah, I agree, obviously, 100%. I still do think that your voice, like many others, has helped bring clarity. I think we live in a moment of extreme clarity, and we've seen also hundreds of thousands, millions of people in the streets for 17, 18 months non-stop. And this is incredible. Like, people don't understand how hard it is to sustain a movement for 18 to 20 months. And this is what has happened. And I think millions of people, I mean, look, I've been working on the question of Palestine for 20 years, and I've had people in my life that were kind of disinterested. You know, it's too complicated. We know your work, but, you know, it's too complicated, blah, blah, blah. And over the last 18 months, I've had people I would never have expected that reached out to me, even people I really didn't speak to anymore, and, you know, and say, Frank, we feel there's something fishy going on watching the BBC and the stuff. What's really happening? So I think people, and that's the only thing really that sort of gives me hope and you know, try to make me optimistic. But I think we just have to still grasp onto something, and that's the only thing we can grasp on. And I mean, we'll talk about this maybe a bit later as well. But I wanted to ask you, like, when you came back to Gaza this second time, it was when the ceasefire had been declared, and we saw some amazing videos and pictures of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians going back north, where they had lost everything, but anyway, they were moving back to where they belonged. I was wondering what, in this brief moment, because I think you came back, the ceasefire was on, but kind of very quickly, you know, Israel started bombing again.
When ceasefire.
And did you hear when I was saying, like, when we saw all these people coming back to the north, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I was wondering, when you came back, what was your experience, and how were the people of Gaza feeling at this moment?
Frank, just for context, I'd been going to Gaza prior to October 2023, so I had visited a lot of the places that I'm going to talk about in a second before they were destroyed by Israel. I think for people I had developed relationships with over years, this period of relative respite had a lot of joy and hope in it. I think I met with them while I was there on a couple of occasions. We even had a coffee one day together. And then when Ramadan started, we broke fast together. It was just despite like rampant destruction, destruction that I think most anyone I know in my life outside of Palestine would have felt really hopeless in the face of. They were so filled with hope. People were going back. They were trying to patch holes in the walls of whatever homes they had left, if their home was still standing. People whose homes were not standing were living in tents or had moved in with neighbors and friends and relatives. But we're talking about the day after, what they would build, what they wanted to subspecialize in, if they were junior doctors, where they wanted their children to go to university. There was a lot of hope interjected within the grief and the loss. And the grief and the loss, Frank, was significant. Every single person I speak to has lost immediate family, extended family, friends, colleagues, their home. I don't know anybody whose home is completely standing. Most people's homes are partially destroyed or flattened. So yeah, I think there was a lot of hope. And hope despite the fact that there really never was a ceasefire. I mean, even in that period, between the end of January and March, I arrived on February 18th. So from my personal experience, from February 18th until March 18th, when Israel rained hell on Gaza, that 1 month period, there was actually daily bombardment, daily gunshot wounds. So there was a lot of ongoing violence from the Israeli military, despite the so-called ceasefire. So they were breaking it on a daily basis. But what happened, it was just relative respite. So people could move around without as much fear, relatively, They could also buy food and soap and shampoo and chocolates. And so in addition to that hopefulness that you sensed in people, there was also a lot of generosity. So we were being invited every day. I kept joking that I was going to be one of the few people who left Gaza fatter than I was when I went in. So I was just constantly being fed. I'm not kidding. Like it reached the point where it was a bit ridiculous. I kept telling them, I don't think I've ever eaten so much in my life, but they were constantly trying to feed me chocolates, and they cooked meals for us with chicken and meat. They hadn't really seen chicken and red meat for almost a year and a half at that point. So I think people were just breathing finally and experiencing joy in things. So yeah, that morning of the 18th was beyond the fact that it was terrorizing. And I don't use that word lightly or accidentally. I genuinely think, Frank, that this is state-sponsored terrorism in the worst possible way, And I feel like we've been using the word genocide so long, it's almost lost its weight. And you need a word that's heavier. And I don't know what word is heavier, but it's so sustained. I'm not, in my short lifetime experience, I'm not used to global establishment of something as genocide and then its continuation. So yeah, I mean, that night was pure terror. We were awoken from our sleep, for those of us who'd fallen asleep, by this earth shattering, shaking noise. The walls were shaking, the windows were shaking, the doors flew open with every blast. And the sound was terrifying. You could hear all the fighter jets, you could hear the bombs. And when you've been around, have you been around aerial bombardment before?
No.
I mean, there's different, it stimulates your senses. And so, if you hear a door slam, you're startled, right? Like if the door slams, you startle. So if it's far, you experience what you would experience if you heard a door slam. It would just be that sudden, oh, what was that sound? But then when it gets closer and closer, there's other ways it stimulates your senses. The ground shakes, the walls shake, if it's really close, your eardrum hits. Sometimes your ears will even ring, depending on how close it is. And so if you imagine, I had experienced a lot of those things the first time I was in Gaza, but this is in the period of 10, 15 minutes. It was just continuous, every single sense. You're just being startled, every few seconds all over again. And then we walked down on the balcony. In addition to all the things you were hearing and feeling, you could just see the sky lighting up across the strip. Everywhere, our balcony gave us a view essentially of, three dimensional, view of in three different directions. And you could just see the sky lighting up in all these places and the bellows of smoke. So honestly, it was terrifying. And there's the fear, there's the fear for your own life. But to be honest, I think for me, that was less than the fear for what was about to come in, and just the devastation, that little bit of hope that we were all holding on to was just suddenly in 1 second crushed in the most vicious way.
Yeah, I mean, you spoke about the need to find new words to describe what's happening, or what has been and what is happening in Gaza. And I think over the next few years, international lawyers and are gonna and others are gonna try to find new words, because we have never seen a genocide, the genocide of the people that are trapped in a cage. This is madness. This is sadism. This is new words. And that's also the thing, when you are lost for words to describe. Words are important. When you feel there's no words anymore, you tend to be paralyzed and you just can't speak. But
sorry, Frank. I was going to say, I think paralysis is like a really important word, and that's, I don't know about you, but every now and then when I'm not inside Gaza and I see, the next horrific, abhorrent thing on my phone or on the news, I do get this sense of paralysis. Sometimes I just sit down and I take a deep breath, and you don't know how to continue with your life. You experience this, and it's this, you just want to scream. And I've started cursing. That's a new thing for me. I didn't used to curse. Now I start, because it's almost like you have so much anger, so much rage, so much sadness, and you don't know where to put it. And I don't recommend the cursing thing. I'm just saying it's been like a source of I guess relief in some ways. But it is very, very paralyzing. I couldn't agree with that sentiment more. And I think that your description of it being also a very exceptional situation because the population is trapped. It's very important because they have been trapped for some 17 years in some ways, but the level of besiegement increases every single day. Now they've kind of destroyed all of Rafah, and when you look at the maps and the area they've taken control of as their buffer zone, which is the same area they've been essentially exterminating, the same area they killed the paramedics in cold blood last week, that area is the border with Egypt. So what this means now is, Gazans used to be able to exit and enter through Egypt under often exceptional circumstances, but they could still enter and exit if they received approval. A lot of goods were brought in through Egypt. This is another level of suffocation beyond water, electricity, movement of humans, movement of goods, even within the sea, which thank God for the Mediterranean, because without the sea, I don't know how you would breathe in Gaza. That beach is such a source of respite. But even within the sea, the fishermen are shot at as soon as they get out to a reasonable distance to fish, So yeah, it's just, it's just another layer of of horror inflicted on, yeah.
Yeah, like remember we were talking about before, like we thought Hind Rajab was like the worst we could see. Remember, and I can't remember when it was, I think it was at least 8 months ago, where this picture on social media went viral. All eyes on Rafah.
Yeah.
Because even the US government had said that Rafah is the red line. And now we're seeing pictures of Rafah, you know, before and after. And Rafah has gone. And that's also why what's making us paralyzed and kind of go crazy. And I think, you know, the swearing and the screaming, I think for me and for a lot of my friends, going on a demo as maybe the main reason has been to be able just to scream for about 2 hours, to scream very loudly for 2 hours, because we just can't really take it anymore. But I wanted to ask you, because you're a pediatrician, and we know children have bore the most, not most, but have been one of the, you know, we know Gaza is like 50% roughly under 16 or something. Can you tell me what kind of impact this genocide, barbarism of the 21st century has had on the children of Gaza? Thanks, Tanya.
I don't know. I mean, what impact has it had on you, Frank? What impact has it had on me? Like, we're changed forever, and it's hard for me sometimes, and I'm sure it's hard to even start to think about what the child in front of me has seen or is thinking or is experiencing. I saw a video yesterday, and I'll go back to the children I've seen personally, but I saw a video yesterday of this girl with her eyes open, and her chest being sutured. And I think her family had not come in with her, so unclear if they survived or what had happened to them. But her eyes were open as she was being stitched with this like large gaping wound on her chest. Ketamine is a drug we use for sedation, and it's a very useful drug because it offers pain relief. It also offers sedation, so the patients sleep, but they often keep their eyes open. And I saw so many children in that last 5+ weeks in Gaza that had that same look of complete dissociation that you get with, it's a dissociative agent, that's what ketamine is, that you get with ketamine, except I hadn't given them any ketamine. So they would come in with some of the worst injuries imaginable, and they would just look straight ahead, completely dissociated. And you expect them to cry, you expect them to ask for their mother, you expect them to do the normal things a 4 and 5 and 6-year-old would do, but they don't. They just dissociate. We had children who had mutism, so children who stop speaking. They understand what you're saying, but they just stop speaking. We had children who had regressed in terms of the things that they used to do in terms of their development. We had children, obviously, who cried and screamed and did all the things you expect children to do in the face of that kind of horror. But I mean, beyond the physical impact, because these are children who've had inadequate nutrition, who've been injured and maimed and out of organized education for now a year and a half. So beyond all the physical impacts that we'll have, I can't even begin to think about the mental impact that this will all have. I, Frank, had never seen shredded bodies or beheaded children or burns to the extent that we'd seen in the last year and a half before in my life as a pediatric intensive care doctor. I'd never seen people come into the emergency department with their foot in a box asking me to sew it back on, or people coming with I had seen brain matter out before, but very, very rarely. It was so common in Gaza that it was actually just a something you assessed for when a child came in with a head injury. They would immediately say in Arabic, brain matter out. That was it. Is the brain matter out? Because it was so common. And if the brain matter was out, it was probably worth you spending your time resuscitating a different child, because this child was prognosis was poor, particularly with the given resources. And so I've never seen those things. Imagine the children in Gaza seeing these things. Imagine anyone seeing these things. I mean, you've seen some of the pictures and videos. Have you ever seen anything so horrific? I mean, it's a slaughterhouse for humans. And to have children see that inflicted on strangers is horrific enough, the way we're seeing it being inflicted on strangers. Imagine seeing it live, and then imagine it seeing live being inflicted on your family. And, you know, people always tell me, oh, it must be so hard to be a pediatrician. It's so sad to see kids that are sick, kids that are dying. I don't think it's more sad than seeing an adult who's sick or dying, to be honest. I find kids easier because kids are simple. They want to be around their parents because that's where they get their security from. It's the person they're attached to. It's where they get their security from. They want to be well fed, and they don't want to be in pain. So their needs are very simple. An adult is worrying about the future. They're worrying about death. They're worrying about a lot of things that kids often don't worry about. It's different for the children in Gaza because, one, you're killing and maiming their parents, so their parents aren't safe, or their parents are dead. So you've removed that level of security. You can't nourish them appropriately because they've been blocking food for a year and a half and have now completely closed the borders. And you often can't even relieve their pain because you don't have enough agents to do that. Again, because Israel is blocking everything from entering. And so you can't offer them the very basic things that they need. And on top of that, they've reached a level of forced maturity that most children at that age don't have. I don't know if you have any children in your life, but when they're 3 and 4, they don't often ask about death or think about their own death. Children in Gaza talk about it all the time. They feel like it's this inevitable thing. You have children ages, who've just learned how to write, writing their own will, saying, give this toy to, if I die, please give this toy to so-and-so, and please give this to so-and-so, because they're expecting to die. So on all those levels, children in Gaza are different. And so when I tell you, I find children easier to deal with when they're critically ill because I know how to attend to their needs in a way that I find it very difficult to attend to the needs of an adult. It's not the case for children in Gaza because we've forced them out of childhood.
Yeah, I've got two boys actually. Yeah, but my friend Iman Marifi, who's a nurse and was in Gaza in February 2024, said that when she was preparing to go to Gaza, she packed all the medical equipment she could find, everything. She left and she was due to go back a few months later. She said, which was about 6 months later. And she said, this time around, I only packed sweets, teddy bears, chocolates, because I realized no medical equipment. The worst was the psychological trauma. People needed to be held. People needed to be cuddled. People needed to laugh. Is that what you felt as well?
I kind of did the same, actually. Like I went with mainly a surgical team this time, and they were constantly making fun of me because I would just pull out balloons and games and lollipops and all sorts of things for my bag, for exactly that reason. I also feel like, I did bring some medical equipment. Unfortunately, I thought I was going during a ceasefire period, and when a lot of things were getting into Gaza. And that changed very quickly after March 18th. Because in the period of almost one night, we finished most of the things that we had, the stock that we had in the emergency department. You know, when you just think about gauze and medications, and I mean, we finished it so quickly. I brought a handful of these military grade tourniquets for when you have life-threatening bleeding. We used them all that first night. I called within an hour of being in the emergency department. I called the pediatric intensive care unit. So Nasser Hospital is 3 buildings. The emergency department that receives all the trauma cases, pediatric and adult, is in the main building, the same building that was bombed by Israel on the 23rd of March. The building next to it is a maternity and child's care building, and that's where the pediatric ICU is. Within an hour of being in the emergency department, I had rung the pediatric ICU saying, please bring all the equipment you can. We've run out of equipment to care for kids. So the emergency department has obviously their stock for children because they receive all the pediatric trauma cases. But there were so many children, Frank, and we used most of the equipment. And so the pediatric ICU team came running down with a box of things that we very quickly used as well. So yeah, I did like your friend. I brought mostly, you know, things to bring some level of respite. I brought little decorations because I knew that Ramadan and Eid were coming up, and I figured a lot of people were living in tents, and you know, it's a period of the year where people decorate and they celebrate, and I was trying to think of ways to create a sense of positivity and hopefulness. So I mostly packed that sort of thing. And the limited amount of medical equipment that I brought was very quickly used up. And Frank, you're not allowed to take in medical equipment or medications unless they're for personal use. So, I mean, that's the absurdity of things as well, is so many of the things that are not allowed in or allowed out, and we could talk about that in a second, but so many of the things that are not allowed in are not dual use. They're not things that can be used for any military purposes. They're not allowed in because they're life-saving or because they help people reconstruct their lives. So yeah. The other reason I kind of agree with your colleague is, you know, I have people tell me or message me saying, I wish I had a skill set. You know, I wish I could go in there and save lives like you guys do. I don't know if we save lives, Frank. I mean, that might be true in a situation where you have a finite insult. You know, you have an earthquake or a crisis and you go and you treat as many patients as possible and you support the healthcare system because it's overwhelmed. And we're certainly doing those things. But every child that was admitted to the pediatric ICU, I'm a pediatric intensive care doctor. So after that, you know, period in the emergency department, I then went to my home base, which is the intensive care unit, and then I took care of the children who were injured on the 18th and admitted to the ICU. All of the children that we admitted to the ICU thankfully survived. Many of them were maimed, but they survived. Countless other children died in the emergency department that night. And they survived thanks to the very hard work of the pediatric intensive care team there. And there was a moment where I felt proud of that. I said, you know, the team worked so hard, and I think we felt proud of it too, because the director of the hospital came by and was congratulating us on all the good care that we provided, despite it being like a really busy period. And I think it made the team feel good. But the reality is, one of the patients, who's 1-year-old, is leaving the ICU without a mother, having received very extensive abdominal surgery at 1 year of age, having still a piece of shrapnel in her lung as a souvenir. Another girl is leaving without any of her sisters because they were all killed, with a mother and father who are both injured, with no spleen because it had to be removed, with multiple injuries to her bowel, to her liver, and the worst injury to her brain. She doesn't move the right side of her body and she struggles to speak. It's very clear that she understands us, but she's struggling to produce words. And a boy is leaving probably, and I'm not sure, I'll have to follow up and see what happened to him, but the orthopedic surgeons were concerned that he wouldn't that he would require amputations of one, if not both, of his legs. And after all of his siblings were killed, bar one 14-year-old sister. So you wonder, as a healthcare provider, how much good you're doing. Not only because they're leaving the ICU maimed, sometimes orphaned, and with having lost so many of the people that they're closest to, but also because they're leaving the ICU back into genocide. So a lot of the people I cared for last year in March are either dead or injured again after we discharged them last March. So, you wonder what kind, how much good you're doing medically. And I think, like your colleague, a lot of the reasons we go is our solidarity, bearing witness, and maybe providing some level of respite in the things that we can bring for people, in the conversations that we can have while we're there, in hopefully showing Palestinians that the world hasn't forgot about them. And at least from a healthcare standpoint, I think the solidarity is very, very important, because these teams have been working nonstop for a year and a half. And honestly, Frank, they're the most remarkable people I've ever worked with. And they really don't deserve what's happening to them. When I tell you they're the most remarkable people I've ever worked with, I really mean it. Just right now, while I've been on this interview, I can see that I've received text messages from a couple of the doctors that I worked with there. One of them lost his mother and most of his siblings, a lot of his uncles and cousins at the beginning, so October 2023. While we were there, he was on the phone with his father in Gaza City, and he was telling his father, as soon as I finish my shift, I'm going to come see you guys. And his father said, no, don't. It's dangerous. Don't come. Just stay where you are. He hung up and was having a conversation with his colleagues about whether he should go or not. And then about 10 minutes later, received a phone call from his brother saying that they were sitting outside of their house and kind of just chatting, and that they were bombed, and his father was killed, his younger brother was killed, and his sister had a spinal injury and is now not moving her arm. I mean, we found out hours later, but the consequences of her injuries, but she's not moving her arms or her legs. And so essentially, he's lost his entire family, 24 members of his family a year and a half ago. And now the rest of his nuclear family, with the exception of a sister who's paralyzed for life, and a brother. And the last 3 days, they've been finishing in the operating room around 1:30, 2 in the morning, because they've been receiving so many casualties. He's still there doing that. Having lost his entire family, he's still at work caring for his patients. They are exhausted, and yet they continue to do it. March 18th, within about 4 hours of being in the emergency department, I was lightheaded. I had to sit down. We had been awake the entire night. We worked nonstop. It was chaos. It's physically exhausting. It's emotionally exhausting to constantly see death and loss and death and loss and death and loss. And I had a home to go to. I don't have children that I'm worrying about, whether they'll be killed while I'm at work. I'm not worrying about my entire livelihood or extended family being exterminated any second. And I was exhausted. I can't imagine what it's like for them after a year and a half. So I think, probably the most important reason we go is just to work with, these remarkable people and provide a level of solidarity that's easier to provide in person.
Thanks, Tanya. Thanks for sharing this with me. I wanted to end with asking you about you've touched upon it, but what is left to say to the world? And I sort of divide the world between the people of the world, and a lot of them have expressed incredible solidarity with the Palestinian people, but have felt completely useless most of the time. And you started pretty much the interview by saying, like, I want to address this. We are not useless. But what is left to tell to the world? And then this 1% of the what we call the decision makers, the ones that have been enabling, supporting, complicit in this genocide, is it even worth talking to them anymore?
I'm not sure how to answer the latter question. Every now and then I get invited to do an interview by a media source that's been manufacturing consent for this from the very beginning. And I have to ask myself that question. Do I just reject it on the basis that they're hopeless? It's a lost cause. They have no journalistic integrity left. I almost don't want to get on their show because out of principle. But then at the same time, they have a wide viewership and they have capacity, in theory, to reach a broader group of people, or in the case of politicians, to effect change immediately. I think in the long run, Frank, we need to create new systems, liberated systems that don't rely on, old colonial, white supremacist ways. And that's going to take time. And I think that's true of universities. I think it's true of media agencies. It's true of journalism. It's true of the film industry. It's true of the medical industry, the medical field as well. We need to be creating waves of social change that are not suppressed, silenced, and by and kind of what's the right word, shifted, I guess, away from by kind of colonial undertones and things that we just can't shake from so many of these systems. And the same thing is true of humanitarian organizations too. This infiltrates every single space. That is going to take a radical change. And hold on, I'm going to actually just read the definition of radicalize, or
yeah, people need to be reminded, really,
what that means. Yeah, I think it's very important.
Manufacturing consent starts with redefining words, right? And like making them sound very scary when actually they're pretty good. But
and they're
yeah.
So it's advocating or based on thorough or complete political or social change, representing or supporting an extreme or progressive section of a political party. A radical person is a person who advocates thorough or complete political or social change. And then in chemistry, this is my favorite definition: a group of atoms behaving as a unit in a number of compounds. Anyway, I bring that up just because I think, just in answer to your question about hope, it seems very appropriate to bring it up now. I derive hope and lack of hopelessness from the fact that this movement is growing and growing in number. It's growing and growing in strength, and it's growing also in commitment. So there's so many people who were scared of speaking out, who felt they were silenced, who are now feeling like there's nothing to lose, that they could not live with their own soul if they didn't risk what they need to risk at this point. And I think that brings me hope, because all these atoms coming together, I think eventually can provoke change, regardless of what politicians want, or what power underlies them. I mean, I was thinking the same thing about the position that the United States has taken recently. I think if enough other countries unite against that position, then there's hope that you can overcome, powers that I'm so sorry. I've been speaking French all day. I think I told you before. Now I'm unable to speak more.
No, please, like,
So I think
it all makes a lot of sense.
I just think that hope comes from the fact that this wave of change keeps growing. But I think we need to remember that my sister messages me every few days saying, I don't know what to do. I wish I had your skill set, or I don't know what to do. I keep posting on social media. I don't know what to do. There's so much we can do. There's so much we can do. We just need to dedicate the time and space for it. You need to organize. If you look back at every atrocity of the past, it was people who organized, and they organized in creative ways. And they were willing to sacrifice. They were willing to sacrifice their position. They were willing to sacrifice their salary. They were willing to sacrifice whatever it took. And I think so many of us, Frank, are at that point now where we're willing to sacrifice whatever it takes.
Thanks, Tanya. I mean, we all have a choice, and at the end of our lives, because we're not eternal, even Musk probably thinks he's eternal and he'll find something to live until he's like 200 years old. But we have a choice, right? And I think our soul is what makes us, right? And I think I'm just trying to think, and again, I don't want to, I'm just trying to think and say, like, to people that keep saying, we have lost, that's it, it's too late, there's no alternative, we've lost. Can you really win? Can someone really call himself a win? Can someone responsible for genocide can call himself a winner? No, they're dead inside. You can't, you're not a human anymore if you have no heart or no soul. And I think by just keep trying, even if it's just, keep trying to get to this place we want to get to, at least it's, we'll have said, at least we've tried very hard. And thank you so much for having shared. Yeah, sorry, go.
No, I was just going to say,
No,
Frank,
I don't want to cut you off. Yeah.
No. I wanted to add one quick thing, because I think we're probably coming to the end now. But I've said this before, but I really think this is going to be the source of shame of so many generations that have lived through this right now. And I don't know, I think back to atrocities of the past, and I always told myself, wow, if I were alive then and I knew it was happening, I really hope I wouldn't have been one of those people that felt like it was far from me, didn't impact me, or worse, felt scared to speak up, or scared to do something about it, or felt too busy to do anything about it. And it happens all the time. I mean, I think back to other atrocities that have happened in our lifetime, whether it's what's happening in Sudan right now, or the Congo, or the Rohingya, or the Uyghurs, or the Iraq War, or the Syria War. Every single, you can sort of cover global geography and talk about all the atrocities that have happened. And I think back, and I wish I was more alert then. I wish I knew exactly what was happening. I wish I understood better. The reality is all of that information is out there now, and it's so available on social media. And it's available through other sources like yourself, who've tried very hard from the very beginning to create spaces to talk about what's happening, to reveal what's happening, to correct historical inaccuracies. And the reality is, now that we know what's happening, we are living that atrocity in real time. And in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever it takes for the full reconciliation of what actually happened, or the full sort of documentation and exposition of what happened, whenever that happens, you're going to have to reckon with what you were doing today during this period, because you do know, and I know, and everybody watching this knows. And we don't have any excuses. We don't. What's happening at Columbia, what's happening at New York University, what's happening at Harvard, what's happening at so many, universities in the United States, for example, might make people feel scared. What's happening at the US border might make people feel scared. And I've seen it in a lot of my American friends and colleagues, where they'll say, oh, I don't want to speak up because I need to go back to the United States, or I don't want to speak up because I'm on X visa, or I don't want to speak up because... Is that the excuse that you want? Is that an excuse you'll be able to live with in 10, 15 years when you have to reckon with this, that you didn't want to risk something personal? I know for me, I hope I don't ever create excuses for myself. I know I do. I think that's natural. But you have to live with those excuses, and your inaction today.
Thanks, Tanya. There's no better ending to, leave people with this question, I think. So thanks really a million for having, giving me the time to share all of this. Thanks, Tanya.
Thank you, Frank.